In the Amazon Prime Video original series The Boys, superheroes are revered as godlike celebrities. It's a highly entertaining action satire that explores what happens when heroes go rogue and abuse their powers. I'm Rob Licuria, Senior Editor at Gold TV. I'm here with composer Christopher Lennertz. You have composed, Chris, a dense, loud, layered, percussive, and propulsive score for the Darkly comic series. What was your brief, though, when you signed on to the project?
Well, I mean, when I signed on, and I was on early, thank goodness, because Eric Kripke, who created the show, we've been friends since college, and so he wanted me from the very beginning. We always work on stuff together, and then I had just I actually first heard about the show right after I finished working on Sausage Party, which was Seth Rogen and Evan Goldberg as well. So I developed a relationship with Seth and Evan, and so when it came time for this show, you know, I kind of within a day of each other, I got an email from Seth and an email from Eric that both said, we've got the most ridiculous, insane, messed up superhero show you could possibly imagine. What do you think? And of course I said I was in. And then they said, you know, we need to skewer everything that everyone thinks superheroes are all about. We need to basically take Marvel and DC and everything and just flip it and be as nasty and violent and sort of unexpected as possible.
Oh, it just sounds like it's so in my wheelhouse, and so many other people have really taken to this because, pardon the French, but a lot of this show is pretty fucked up. And that's the only way to describe it, okay? Because there are like babies with lasers shooting out of its eyes, and you've got like bloodied corpses, and people are exploding. It's really, really off the wall, and the music has to meet that challenge. The first thing that occurred to me was, many of the cues that you use in so many of the themes effectively parody or kind of skewer that superhero genre. Talk us through that aspect of the score, because that must be quite difficult to get right.
Yeah, well, I mean, the interesting thing about that, and this was sort of a concept that we tried at the beginning that we thought could work, was what if we actually record a full live orchestra, which we did, and have it be the most over-the-top, you know, the Vought sound is full propaganda, you know, Marvel, but is like as overproduced as possible. But then when things start going wrong, we actually use software, we use computer plugins that actually warp and pitch down. It actually bends the pitch, not of a single instrument like you normally would with a guitar or something like that, but actually bends an entire 80-piece orchestra down. Or up, depending on what's going on. So like in, obviously season 1's out. So in episode 5, when the plane starts going down and Homelander says, you know what, I'm out of here. When that all happens, there's this huge, like epic, you know, Avengers style, the 7 theme that I wrote very much in a Marvel style. And then all of a sudden when he's like, come on, we're out. All of a sudden the entire orchestra goes out of tune. And that's something we really wanted to be able to do. And the only way that works really effectively is if the parts that are in tune are incredibly they're like expected, and they're as stereotypically superhero as you can get. And that's kind of was our idea.
Wow, I didn't quite realize that, because to me it sounds so heightened, but there were parts where I felt it was like off on purpose. And because I have a small brain, I'm trying to comprehend what you're trying to go for there, and that makes a lot of sense. The other thing that I love about this score is that it reminded me of that genre of music that you would expect to see in a propaganda video. It's kind of like Basil Polidorus's impeccable Star Trek Troopers score. That's one of my favorites of all time. And this reminds me a little of that. It's unabashedly patriotic, it's rousing, but like to the nth degree. How do you effectively do that as a composer?
Well, I mean, it's funny that you say, I don't know if you knew, but Basil was my mentor. I worked for Basil for 4 years.
I had no idea.
I worked for Basil. Yeah, I worked for Basil for 4 years, and he was like sort of an adopted dad to me out here in LA. And he really does know better. Like his muscular action scores like that, and RoboCop, and they're just so fantastic. And that's really what I was trying to channel, was this muscular, overproduced, unapologetically heroic score. There's no subtlety in it. It's just is stereotypically hero as you can get. And that's sort of what I tried to do. And I definitely learned that sort of approach from working with him. And it's so awesome that you love that score. It's one of my absolute favorites. Clandestine Drop is just like so phenomenal.
Oh my God. Yeah, like we could just talk about that for the whole interview, but I won't do that because we've got plenty more. But that's the kind of score that I would listen to in the gym, and now I listen to yours. It's so funny that what a small world. But anyway, that was a complete coincidence.
That's awesome.
The other thing is, because I speak to a lot of composers, right? That's as part of this job, and normally we speak about their use of strings and how thoroughly emotional strings can be on scores. But for your one, I was desperately looking for the percussive tracks because I knew that they were there. This doesn't disappoint. Talk us through a track, for example, like On the Trail. What instruments are you employing to drive and propel the narrative with that use of percussion?
Well, the big thing that when I started doing demos for Eric at the very outset, literally the first probably 3 or 4 rounds of demos fell flat. And the note that I always got back from Eric was, note, too clean, too produced, too good, over and over and over again. And so I kept using, I kept trying to affect the instruments that I had. And I even brought in, percussionists who would bring, big taiko drums that are worth tens of thousands of dollars. And he kept saying the same thing. No, man, it just doesn't, it needs to feel like stuff you found at a junkyard being played by people who aren't very good in their garage. And I'm like, okay, I can do that. So what we actually did, almost all of the percussion and most of the rhythmic stuff in the score are really not technically percussion instruments. The drums are an old drum kit played poorly, a lot of times by me or part of the band, but a lot of the percussion, can I grab some things?
Yes.
Because I'll show you. One of the things that we do a lot is, I'll be right back to keep talking, is we really did percussion with things that weren't percussion. So a lot of times we would use like this charango, which is an Argentinian instrument where we would do, and then we would layer that with something like, this is my favorite. This was all over last year's scores. A Skywalker Cup,
oh, yeah.
Which I got at Skywalker Ranch. And so literally it's just, and we would put it through guitar distortion pedals to make it sound nasty. And even things like, the metal kind of sounds, instead of being normal shakers, they're like these huge cheese grater things where it's like, so we would be doing all these rhythms that basically sound like stuff you found like in the trash, which is super fun. And then once we would get them into the computer and we would record them, we would then throw them through all kinds of, electronics, wah-wah pedals, guitar pedals, pitch pedals, things like that, to make everything really mangled and, and nasty. And even, it was even to the point where there were a couple times I turned in, a final cue and Eric would be like, no, I like the demo better. And we would find out that one of the reasons he liked the demo better is because I didn't edit the audio at all. So there were all these little snaps and, and things that sounded like unplugging a guitar cable, which normally in a big movie, you'd be like, oh, we gotta cut that out and make it super clean and super pristine. And Eric was always like, no, I want that. I want to hear the buzz from the amplifier. I want to hear the feedback from the microphone. And so we leave all that stuff in, which actually makes it feel like hopefully makes it feel like you're sitting there with Butcher and Huey and everybody and waiting for the shit to go down, really.
Yeah. I'm so glad you said that, because it's hard for me to say to a composer, your music sounded really dirty and grungy and kind of distorted, because that sounds like an insult, but that's exactly what you needed to do for the boys, not the soups, but the boys. It needed to be right in the basement, and it's so effective. So I'm really glad you mentioned that. Now I'm going to be listening to your music, thinking about, cheese graters, and it's like you're a Foley artist all of a sudden. It's very interesting that you.
Yeah, and it's fun too. I don't ever get to do that on big budget, studio movies. They want everything perfectly clean, and so it's really fun to be able to be this nasty.
Yeah. It also occurred to me, because if you look through your credits, a long list of credits, a lot of them are comedies. There's some animated stuff in there, some action stuff in there. I mean, you do a whole variety of things, but on the comedies, I'm curious to know, because I haven't really had a chance to ask this sort of a composer, from your perspective, what is the hardest part of composing for comedy in particular, or is it just depending on the subject matter?
No, well, I mean, the hardest and sort of the most difficult to pin down is timing. I really think comedy is the hardest thing to do in anything, music, acting, whatever. And that's I think it's to me, it's not unusual. It is not a surprise that, when you look at actors like Tom Hanks, actors like Robin Williams, all of these amazing, now Oscar-winning actors, a lot of them started, Jim Carrey, all these guys started in comedy because the timing is impeccable. And to have that sense of being able to take an entire monologue of dialogue and make sure you land at exactly the right moment to get the exact reaction you want is really very precise in comedy. And I think music works the same way. One of the things that we do, very much with comedies, especially when you're doing comedies that are, either with big jokes or with any kind of slapstick or stuff, whether it be a Kevin Hart comedy or even something like Sausage Party, often the music plays it very, very straight. On something like Ride Along, for example, the action scenes will be really action. If you listen to the piece of music outside of the movie, you wouldn't know it was from a comedy. You'd think, oh, this is from a street, a tough cop movie. And you would get to, but the key of it is you would build up to right before Kevin Hart turns around, gives you this particular look, and then says his one-liner that everyone goes crazy for. But it's where the music stops. And then after he drops the joke, you wait a beat or two until some perfect moment, and then you can come in and tell the audience that it's okay to laugh. So It has a lot to do with tone and timing.
Yeah, see, we don't pick up on that because you're doing the job of a composer, which brings me to this more general question. I think there's a fine line between music that can be too invasive or too subliminal. That's the kind of, the dichotomy, affecting our experience as the audience. Ultimately, it's crucial, though, in telling the story. So for you, as a composer, is that balance between foreground and background challenging to get right?
Yeah, I mean, part of it really depends on the kind of film or TV show it is. Something like Lost in Space, for example, the music's very forefront, and it's done in the whole thing is on purpose done in a very sort of what I would consider a sort of an 80s adventure way, the way like a Bob Zemeckis movie would have done it, or the way an old Spielberg movie would have done it. In which case, it's a fantasy, it's a movie. Whereas something even like The Boys, there's a lot of times where we'll either have no music or we'll have such simple music. We'll have such a tiny, thread of music underneath something. And a lot of times it comes from Eric or Seth or anybody saying, I don't want to know that there's music here because it'll remind me that I'm watching a show instead of real. And so we'll often craft things that are very, very minimal, just for a little bit of tension or a little bit of an anxiety, just to support what is already a great performance by the actor and a really amazing looking scene by the director and DP. So a lot of it has to do with that. But sometimes, you really have to pick your moments. I think that's the amazing thing. And that's what somebody like Basil, or you can see, it's the beginning of Hunt for Red October is a great example where, there's however many hundreds of army, Russian army, all standing at attention, and there's a huge sub and all this stuff, but you don't really hear any of that. That's director choice of saying, this is a music moment. All I need to hear right now is that choir, because that's going to tell me everything I need to know. I don't need to hear who's, pulling up the ramp on the way to the sub. Doesn't matter. Whereas then when you get into some other moments, you may say, okay, this isn't really a music moment. Music's only here to support, and we'll pull it down and let it be all about dialogue, or let it be even about a sound effect that's really important, a ticking clock or something like that.
Yeah.
So it's usually done with a lot of, hopefully a lot of forethought in terms of what's the most important thing to get the reaction you need from the audience.
Yeah, that makes a hell of a lot of sense to me now that you've said it. My curiosity is also about the fusion of electronic and orchestral music, because in your score it's a bit more obvious. You can see that you have used quite a lot of electronic sounds to kind of distort or change the sounds that you had that you were using. But a lot of composers meld them without us even realizing it. And I'm wondering, from your perspective, what are the pros and cons of purely orchestral scores to perhaps orchestral scores that blend a lot of electronic sounds in them?
I mean, for me, I've always sort of let the film or show decide what it needed, or the character decide what it needed. And I'm trying to think of really good examples of that. I feel like there are certain things that electronics can't really do that only acoustic vibrating instruments can do, that bring so much heart to a score. Whereas something like obviously something like a Schindler's List. I mean, there's no way to do that. It wouldn't be the same. It's not to say that it couldn't exist, but it would be a different movie.
Yeah.
If you didn't have that violin just tearing your heart out. But you can still make another war movie like a Dunkirk or a 1917, which had lots of electronics in it. Obviously, Dunkirk is very electronic, whereas 1917 is sort of a blend, and there is something about that it's less of a character piece, and it's less about, I think, 1917 probably is a really good example, because I feel like in that movie, it was less about you feeling like you shared the heart of the main character. It was more like you were there with them, but you weren't really them. And whereas like it's something that's like literally, gut wrenching, then the acoustic instruments to me make that sing more. It makes you kind of pulls you in. And as far as blending the stuff, I mean, that's the thing that's really been interesting, even for me on The Boys and somewhat in Lost in Space the last couple of years, is the idea of using electronics to manipulate or acoustic instruments. So even something like Lost in Space, we did a couple of cues in the first season where we had a singer, Elizabeth Scott, this amazing singer, and we processed her voice with lots of echo, and we actually spread it around this room while Maureen was in space. So it definitely didn't sound just like a singer. It felt like it was the voice, but with this layer of science fiction. And the big thing was, it was try to get the idea of like, well, what is it if you're fully alone in space? What would give you that feeling? And it was this echo and surrounding the audience. So if you watch in 5-1, you actually will feel like the vocals are all around you. And that's something that, you can't do that without electronics. So there's a lot of things that it can be really, really helpful to create an atmosphere, that you couldn't get just by recording an orchestra.
Yeah, I think ultimately acoustic is so organic, which is appropriate. And then electronic will elevate it or change it or distort it, which is also appropriate. And what you're saying is depending on what you're doing. And that's really interesting to me. And I think ultimately you really have done that on The Boys. And congrats on a great score, mate, really. And thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Oh my God, thank you. Thanks for being here. And thanks everybody for watching.
Everybody go to Gold Derby, make your predictions, click subscribe. Don't forget to watch all of our great contender chats, just like this one with Chris.